Stone walls were scratched with codes before a city fell silent. In every city that's ever fallen, there are signs. Whispers in the dust, warnings in the dark. But some cities die with a silence so absolute, so eerie, that centuries later, their ghosts linger, restless and unsolved. Imagine walking the deserted streets of such a place. Cracked stone, doors ajar, ashes on the hearths, and on the city's walls, everywhere, a feverish tapestry of scratched codes and symbols, marks that seem older than the city itself, marks that no one remembers carving. This is not legend. Across Europe and beyond, ruins hold stories written in stone, odd lines, looping sigils, runic shapes that don't match any known language. Archaeologists dig through layers of history, plagues, invasions, fires, and find beneath it all a final, desperate outpouring etched by unknown hands. Who carved them? And why do they always appear on the eve of catastrophe, when a city teeters on the edge and soon falls forever silent? It always begins with fear, a sense that something is wrong, invisible but approaching. Maybe it's famine, maybe it's plague, maybe it's something stranger, the slow leaking away of hope as wells run dry, crops rot, or the sky burns red with omens no one dares name. People gather at night, restless, watching the city walls. At first, it's just a few scratches, hidden behind market stalls or inside cold, empty churches. Then, the markings spread, across doorways, up stairwells, along the foundations where only the desperate tread. Some are simple, a cross inside a circle, a line crossed by 3 slashes. Others are intricate, twisting, impossible to trace without losing yourself in the spiral. Sometimes they repeat in sequence, patterns too deliberate to be random, too alien to be understood. No two are ever quite the same, and when the city finally falls, when the last bell goes silent, the last voice fades, the rats and dust claim the streets. These symbols remain, stubborn and mocking, like the final breath of a mind that knew it would never be heard. Historians debate their meaning. Some say the markings are old thieves' codes, secret signs left by outcasts, warning others of danger or opportunity. Others believe they're prayers, desperate magic scratched in hopes of warding off disaster. The work of frightened hands trying to negotiate with forces no priest could tame. Some even whisper they are curses, or instructions for those who would one day return. But then there are the stories, eyewitness accounts, half remembered by survivors or found in the yellowed pages of chronicles. A merchant in Erfurt who swore he saw men and women in rags, silent as shadows, carving symbols beneath the city gate the night before the plague arrived. A priest in Carcassonne who tried to scrub out the marks, only to find them returned, darker and deeper, each morning. A child in Visby who, years after the town's ruin, described in fevered dreams the patterns he had traced with his finger, marks he said were not for the living to understand. Modern science offers theories, but not answers. Radiocarbon dates the stone, but not the hand. Linguists chart similarities with runes, alchemical glyphs, secret languages invented by prisoners and spies. But the code never cracks. Sometimes, the same symbols appear in cities separated by oceans and centuries, as if the impulse to leave these marks was buried deep in the human mind. A last defense against oblivion, a warning flung into the future. As you stand in the ruins, running your own hand over the grooves, it's impossible not to wonder. What did they see, these people who scratched their fear and hope into the very bones of the city? Were they trying to ward off the end, to call for help from beyond the walls, or to remember themselves when the world was gone? Did they believe someone, anyone, would ever read what they left behind? Sometimes, new cities rise atop the old, and the carvings are buried and forgotten. Sometimes, they're chiseled away by conquerors, erased as if to deny that fear ever lived there. But sometimes, the marks survive, found centuries later by children playing in forbidden corners, or by the archaeologist's lantern. Each new discovery reignites the mystery. Why did the walls become the last refuge for secrets? What catastrophe, natural or unnatural, compelled hands to work in darkness, scratching codes only the desperate or the doomed could understand? Perhaps the truth is that in the face of disaster, words are not enough. Language fractures under the weight of panic and despair. What's left are symbols, pure, urgent, and raw. Each mark is a heartbeat, a final message. We were here, We saw what came. We tried to leave a sign, but no one, not then or now, can fully decipher what it means. So the next time you walk an ancient city, eyes lingering on old stone, look closely. That rough patch on the wall, that cluster of lines beside the gate, they might be nothing. Or they might be the echo of a vanished city's last stand, a warning or a plea, left by hands that knew words would never survive what was coming. The silence that follows is not just absence, it's the sound of a code no living voice can break, a secret held forever between the stones. A castle wall cried water for 3 nights before a betrayal. In the hush before dawn, a castle sleeps atop a low, shrouded hill, its walls ancient, scarred by storms and battles, yet still standing as a bulwark against the wild world beyond. Torches sputter along the battlements, and the only sounds are the hush of wind and the distant cries of restless crows. Yet, inside these walls, a mystery brews, one that will ripple through history, shattering trust and birthing legends whispered long after all who lived here are dust. For 3 nights, the castle itself is said to have wept, its stones leaking water like tears, seeping from the mortar in silent, spectral streams. It is an omen that will become infamous, a prophecy fulfilled in blood and betrayal. Those who were there would never forget it. Monks, recording the event by flickering candlelight, wrote of the weeping stone with reverence and dread. Servants muttered in corners, their hands shaking as they pointed out the dark streaks glistening down the walls. Even the lord of the castle, a man not easily rattled, found himself haunted by the sight. Solid masonry, centuries old, crying as if it could foresee the horror about to unfold. They would say later that the air felt charged, as if the stones themselves were trying to warn them. The first night, only a few noticed. A torchbearer paused beneath the north tower and saw dampness where none had been before. In the morning, a fine sheen of water lingered, shimmering like dew in the slanting light. But the weather had been dry for weeks. No rain, no mist, and yet the stones wept. By the second night, word had spread. Small knots of people gathered quietly in the courtyards, casting nervous glances upward, whispering prayers and old superstitions. Some said the walls cried for all the blood spilled within them, for every oath broken, every secret kept behind their cold, gray face. By the third night, the weeping could not be denied. The walls leaked in streaks, the moisture pooling along the cracks, running like tears to the base of the tower. Monks were summoned from the nearby abbey. They arrived in procession, chanting softly, sensing the weight of something uncanny. To the monks, the weeping was no mere accident of nature. It was a sign, a warning sent by forces beyond mortal understanding. They recorded everything: the time, the temperature, the strange taste of the air. They wrote of weeping stones as a message from heaven or hell, an omen as old as the scriptures themselves. In every castle, legends grew like moss in the shadows. The walls, it was said, remembered. They bore witness to all that happened, carrying the secrets of rulers and traitors, loves and murders, vows whispered in the dark. The people of the Middle Ages saw omens in every crack, every odd sound, every flicker of candlelight. A weeping wall was not just a curiosity, it was a cause for fear, a harbinger of tragedy. And soon, the omen would reveal its meaning. The lord of the castle, a man of noble blood, neither cruel nor gentle, but fiercely proud, had enemies closer than he knew. In the feasting hall, laughter echoed and wine flowed. But beneath the merriment, tension simmered. The lord's cousin, embittered by years of rivalry and quiet humiliation, had hatched a plan to seize what he believed was rightfully his. Outside the castle, mercenaries waited in the woods, bribed with silver, ready to act at the first signal. Inside, the cousin whispered poison into trusted ears, sowing doubts and sharpening blades in the dark. The night of the betrayal arrived with the hush of a storm about to break. The castle slept uneasily, as if some ancestral memory stirred in its bones. A servant, waking to fetch water, paused by the crying wall. He swore he heard a sound like distant sobbing, though none but stone and shadows kept him company. In the lord's chamber, heavy with the scent of burning tallow and old linen, a shape moved in silence. The cousin, dagger in hand, crept toward the sleeping noble. History would record little of the struggle. There was a muffled cry, a flash of steel, a spreading stain on the sheets. When the sun rose, the lord was dead, and the castle forever changed. The next morning, the castle awoke to chaos. The loyal awoke to horror, the nobleman gone, the cousin missing, panic spreading like fire through the halls. The monks, grim-faced, pointed to the walls still wet with the last of their tears. In the courtyard, villagers gathered, drawn by rumors of omens and murder. The castle was sealed, searched from cellar to tower, but the betrayer was gone, vanished into the forests beyond, leaving only fear and legend behind. The chronicles do not say if the wall ever wept again. Perhaps, with the act done, the stone's warning was spent. But the story passed from tongue to tongue, growing with each telling. Some swore the stone still leaked tears on the anniversary of the murder. Others claimed to see faces in the damp streaks, or to hear soft weeping on windless nights. For the monks who wrote the tale, the event was proof that the divine sometimes intervenes in the world of men, sending signs to those who know how to read them. Medieval people believed deeply in omens. For them, the world was a tapestry woven from the threads of the seen and the unseen, the material and the spiritual. Every unexplained event could be a message, a warning, a punishment, a call to repentance. The crying wall was one of many such stories, but few were so vivid, so chilling, so well remembered. To those who lived through it, the memory lingered long after the castle was rebuilt and new lords ruled its halls. Modern minds may dismiss such tales as superstition or coincidence. Science tells us that moisture can seep through stone for 100 reasons: weather, groundwater, the peculiarities of ancient mortar. But for those who watched the walls weep and then witnessed the act of betrayal that followed, no explanation was ever sufficient. They knew what they saw, and it haunted them for the rest of their lives. There is a peculiar terror in the thought that the world itself can warn us, that stone can grieve and mourn for what it knows is coming. In the Middle Ages, this idea was both a comfort and a curse. It meant that nothing happened in secret, that the very walls might betray a traitor or mourn a coming death. It meant that somewhere, in the heart of every fortress, every town, the stones themselves listened, and sometimes they cried. The story of the weeping stone survives in monastic chronicles. The ink faded, but the warning clear. Trust not only your friends and family, but also the walls that hold your secrets. For in the silent language of water and stone, history sometimes speaks. And those who listen may, just for a moment, glimpse the shape of the disaster that waits in the dark. Whispers were heard in a tower wall after a lost child vanished. Tonight we travel back in time to a place where stone walls never truly sleep. There are towers scattered across Europe, whose histories are soaked in tales of siege, betrayal, and loss. But rarely does a story emerge as haunting or as unsettlingly unsolved as what happened in the Tower of Sobriquet, a forgotten outpost on the edge of the medieval world, where a child's disappearance left scars deeper than any sword could cut. Imagine for a moment the cold stone rising above tangled woods, its ancient mortar holding centuries of secrets. This was a place designed for vigilance. Guards rotated through sleepless nights, listening for threats in the darkness beyond the torchlight. But in the late autumn of 1371, a different kind of vigilance gripped the tower. A vigilance not against enemies, but against something unseen and utterly inexplicable. The records begin, as they always do, with a simple entry. Child missing. None saw him leave. His name, lost in the crumbling pages of a guard captain's journal, was that of a baker's youngest son, sent to deliver bread to the tower, as local children sometimes did for a few copper coins. He was last seen entering through the outer portcullis, clutching a woven basket. No one recalls seeing him leave. Medieval towers were not the vast, hollow castles you see in films. They were thick-walled, with winding stairs, storage chambers, and rooms stacked atop one another like forgotten thoughts. In a storm, wind would rattle the arrow slits and moan through every gap. But what happened next was not the wind. The day after the child's disappearance, a sense of unease settled in the tower. At first, the guards thought it was simply the chill of late autumn, the fear that someone might be blamed, or worse, accused of some unthinkable crime. But by the second night, the men on watch began to report something stranger, a faint sobbing, rising from the very walls themselves. Picture a medieval guard, sleep-starved, superstitious, forever alert for dangers both real and imagined. These men were not unaccustomed to odd noises, stones shifting, rats scratching, distant cries from the forest. But this was different. This was the sound of a child weeping, muffled as if from behind layers of stone. The first to hear it was a veteran named Erwan. He was certain he had dozed off. But the next night, another guard, then another. Always on the same floor, always from the same stretch of wall in the western watchtower. What makes this story more than a mere ghost tale is how meticulously it was recorded. The commander, fearful that hysteria would spread, wrote down the guards' accounts word for word. They described the cries as faint but unmistakable. A child's whimper, sometimes stifled sobs, sometimes a soft voice repeating words in a dialect that faded with the wind. They searched for cracks, for hidden alcoves, anywhere a frightened child might have crawled or where sound could travel. Nothing. The wall was solid stone, laid thick and mortared with lime so old it was harder than marble. Rumors, of course, began to grow. The people in the surrounding village whispered about fairy abductions, curses, or a vengeful spirit returned to claim the living. Medieval Europe was a world where the supernatural was woven into daily life. Every unexplained tragedy was a crack through which old beliefs could seep. But the official inquiry was relentless, almost modern in its obsession. The entire western wall was examined. They broke through loose stones, pulled up rushes from the floor, even lowered a lantern on a rope from the roof to look for secret gaps. Nothing. No secret chamber, no body, no traces but the echoes that continued night after night. Some began to fear the wall itself had become cursed, not by dark magic, but by the unbearable weight of sorrow. In medieval folklore, there was a belief that stone, especially in places of tragedy, could absorb the last emotions of the lost. The French called it la mémoire des pierres, the memory of stones. There are chronicles from all over Europe where peasants and knights alike claimed to hear voices, footsteps, or sobbing from walls that witnessed horror. This was not entirely dismissed, even by the most rational minds of the age. But what made the Tower of Sobriquet infamous was not just the sound, but how it changed the men who heard it. Several guards, after only a few weeks of night watch, reported insomnia, dreams of suffocation, and a persistent feeling of dread. One man claimed that as he leaned against the wall, the stone grew cold, then almost warm, as if a small body pressed against it from the other side. He resigned his post within days, refusing to enter the tower again. Another, more skeptical, tried to mock the sobbing voice by speaking back to it, only to wake that night in a fever, raving about being buried alive. The tower's lord, desperate to end the rumors, had a local priest bless the wall, burning incense and reciting Latin prayers until smoke choked the stairwell. The crying subsided, briefly, but within a week it returned, softer than before, but now joined by what some swore was the sound of scraping, as if small fingers dragged along the inner stone. Years passed, and the tale took on a life of its own. The tower remained in use, but the Western Watch was avoided by all but the most desperate for coin. New recruits were dared to spend the night against the cursed wall. Some lasted only hours. Even visiting nobles, who came to hunt in the nearby woods, found themselves drawn to the legend. Chroniclers wrote down every rumor, every failed exorcism, every account of tears pressed from stone. By the late 15th century, the tower was abandoned. No army ever breached its walls, no siege ever tested its defenses. But the memory of the lost child, and the wall that whispered, was enough to empty it. Villagers said that in certain weather, especially on chill autumn nights, you could still hear the faint cries if you pressed your ear to the old stones. In the centuries since, the legend has been told and retold, but fragments of the original inquiry survive. The wall itself was examined again during renovations in the 19th century. Engineers found nothing, no hidden space, no skeleton, no clue. Yet, a French folklorist recorded that his guide, an old woman who grew up in the village, refused to enter the tower, saying, "It is not haunted, it is sad. And sadness endures longer than any ghost." So, what really happened in the Tower of Sobriquet? Was it the echo of a real tragedy, stone amplifying grief until it broke the minds of the living? Was there some medieval architectural flaw, a hollow, a pocket, that turned the wind into voices? Or did the collective guilt of a community, unable to protect its most vulnerable, create a legend that not even centuries of silence could erase? In the end, the The story reminds us that history is not only built from what can be measured and touched, but also from what is felt and feared. The memory of one lost child, written in the language of sorrow and the echoes that outlast empires, is preserved, not just in chronicles, but in the very stones of the world. And sometimes, when the night is still and the wind presses against cold stone, you might just hear it yourself. The faint, impossible sound of someone weeping behind a wall that should have no space for sorrow at all. An enclosed wall, hollowed by hand, was found, stuffed with notes. There are places in the world where the past presses so close to the surface, it's almost as if it's waiting for the faintest crack. A moment when someone will stumble on a secret that was never meant to be found. In the winter of 1863, deep in the shadowed cloisters of an ancient monastery, masons hammered at an old stone wall to widen a doorway. As the first block tumbled away, the men expected only dust, maybe a mouse nest. Instead, what spilled out into the cold daylight changed the way we think about confession, fear, and what it means to carry a secret. A single parchment scrap fluttered to the ground, as brittle as old leaves. Then another. The workers stopped, staring. The cavity inside the wall, hollowed by hands centuries before, was stuffed with hundreds, maybe thousands, of tightly folded notes. The men called for the abbot, their voices echoing through stone corridors that hadn't seen such excitement in generations. Soon the entire monastery was alive with speculation. Who had hidden these messages, and why seal them away, mortared into darkness for all eternity? What emerged from that wall wasn't treasure or relics. It was something far more unsettling. These scraps of parchment, scrawled in Latin, French, German, and local dialects, spanned over 250 years of the monastery's history. Some were barely legible, ink faded by time and damp, but many remained shockingly vivid, as if their authors had just finished writing them and pressed them with shaking hands into the wall. Each one was a silent cry from the past, sealed in darkness to keep it from ever seeing the light. As the monks and hired scribes began to read, a pattern revealed itself. Many notes were confessions of theft, envy, forbidden love, small betrayals. Some were warnings addressed to no one in particular. Don't trust Brother Mathieu. Beware the baker's wine. A few were curses, edged with a bitterness that transcended the centuries. May the thief who stole my cloak know only cold until the day of his death. One read, signed only with a trembling initial. Another, written in a spidery hand, begged forgiveness for a crime left unnamed, its author signing off as a soul beyond saving. But there was something deeper, too. The more the monks read, the more they realized these scraps weren't just idle gossip or confessions whispered to a priest. Many were desperate attempts to reach God directly, circumventing the church's rituals, as if the wall itself was a confessor, a silent judge that could not betray a secret. This was dangerous territory in an age when every confession had to pass through official channels, when the smallest slip could lead to penance, shame, or, for serious offenses, even exile or execution. What could drive so many to risk hiding their souls in stone? To understand, you have to step into the mind of a medieval monk, or a lay brother, or even a desperate peasant who found themselves within these walls. The monastery was not just a place of worship, it was a small city, sealed off from the outside world, governed by strict rules and even stricter silence. For some, it was sanctuary. For others, a prison. Behind closed doors, the lines between piety and fear blurred. Sins were confessed in secret, sometimes under threat of violence or blackmail. Some monks wielded the power of forgiveness like a blade, and there were rumors of confessionals used to trap and control rather than absolve. Within that tense world, the idea of a hidden wall, a literal, physical chamber for secrets, became irresistible. The oldest notes, dated from the late 1200s, are written in careful, educated Latin. But by the 1400s, there are crude drawings, spells to ward off illness, even fragments of folk tales. Over time, the wall became more than a hiding place. It was a living document, the shadow ledger of a community's hidden life. Those who could not trust flesh and blood priests or who feared the church's wrath risked everything to seal their words in stone. Some of the most chilling discoveries were curses written by monks against each other, evidence of feuds that had boiled beneath the calm surface of monastic life. Let Brother Hugo's tongue shrivel for every lie he tells in prayer. One furious scribble reads, "Another begs God to blind an abbot for his cruelty to the poor." These were not anonymous grievances. They were weapons, tucked away in the one place where they might never be found, or so the writers thought. Other notes were heartbreakingly personal. A string of confessions, written in the same hand, appears to come from a young novice struggling with forbidden love. He writes to the wall again and again over 3 years, his handwriting changing as he ages. "I have sinned in thought and deed with Brother L. I cannot be rid of this hunger. If God will not forgive me, may this stone do so." In another, a woman, probably a servant or a visitor, writes of her child lost to fever, begging for a sign that her soul is safe. There are apologies to parents, secret prayers for release from suffering, even cryptic messages that read like codes. "He who knows the wall's true hollow holds the abbot's key." How did the tradition begin? No one knows for certain. Some historians believe it started as a single desperate act. A monk unable to bear the weight of his guilt, too afraid to confess, slips a note into a crack. Others argue it was a form of protest, a silent rebellion against the monastery's authority, or even a secret ritual handed down through generations. It's possible that those first messages were soon joined by others, and as word spread, the hollowed wall became an open secret, a confessional without a face. The location of the wall itself is telling. It was not in the main chapel, nor near the abbot's quarters, but in a quiet side corridor, near a room where the sick and dying were once tended. Was it a place chosen for its secrecy, or for its nearness to death, to those on the edge of the next world, desperate to lighten their souls before the end? Among the notes were found prayers for the dying, pleas for mercy, and even the last words of men and women who vanished from the monastery's records without explanation. After the discovery, the wall's contents were painstakingly catalogued. The local bishop, terrified of what might be revealed, tried to suppress the most damning confessions. But a few brave scholars managed to transcribe many of the notes before they vanished into church archives. To this day, only fragments remain in public record, enough to hint at a hidden history beneath the surface of faith, where fear and hope twisted together in the darkness. What makes this story more than just a curiosity is the raw humanity of what those notes contain. In a world where the price of a wrong word could be death, where public penance could mean lifelong shame, the desire to confess, to curse, to plead for help was not erased. It was simply buried. The wall became a pressure valve for the soul, a place where the voiceless could finally speak. When you read these scraps, you realize how little has changed. Even now, people carve their secrets into digital walls, hoping no one will ever find them. So next time you step into a cold, echoing church, or run your hand along ancient stone, remember this. Sometimes, the walls really do have ears. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you'll hear centuries of whispered hopes, desperate bargains, and untold stories, still trapped in the dark, waiting for someone to set them free. Carvings in prison walls matched events that hadn't happened yet. Beneath the surface of every stone fortress or crumbling castle, beneath the polished facades of history's grandest courts, lie chambers that rarely appear in any chronicle. A labyrinth of prison cells, narrow and airless, where the condemned and forgotten have waited out their days. These walls have heard everything. Prayers whispered in desperation, curses spat in rage, and silent, trembling secrets etched in the darkness. But some of those secrets, carved deep into the cold, unyielding stone, still send shivers down the spines of historians. Because in certain prisons, especially across medieval Europe, strange, almost prophetic markings appeared, scratched by desperate hands that would not reveal their meaning for years. Sometimes, not until after their authors were long dead. Imagine descending a torchlit stairwell into a medieval dungeon. The air is thick with the smell of damp, mold, sweat, and something else. Despair itself. Your eyes adjust to the gloom, flickering shadows crawling along the stones. Here, the walls are tattooed with layer after layer of graffiti, crude names, tally marks counting endless days, desperate messages to loved ones, prayers to saints, and sometimes just meaningless scribbles. But then there are the strange symbols, lines and shapes no one could immediately decipher. For years, they were dismissed as the ramblings of men losing their minds, or private codes meant only for other inmates. But what no one realized was that some of these symbols would predict events, catastrophes, uprisings, even royal deaths, long before they unfolded outside those prison walls. The story truly took shape in the Tower of London, a place already heavy with the echoes of suffering. Generations of prisoners had scratched their marks into its cells, hoping to outlast their own oblivion. Sometime in the early 1500s, wardens began noticing strange, repeating patterns. Spiral knots, broken circles, clusters of triangles. At first, these were nothing more than curiosities. But after the execution of a nobleman accused of treason, an archivist recognized one of the more intricate sequences from an incident a decade earlier, etched exactly into the cell's wall, years before it happened. The code wasn't just a memory, it was a map of the future, and it matched the events so precisely that even the most skeptical scholars felt a chill. These discoveries sent a ripple through the courts. Royal chroniclers began to quietly document these wall carvings, afraid of encouraging more dangerous superstition among the masses. But the phenomenon wasn't limited to England. In the dungeons beneath Castel Sant'Angelo in Rome, archivists cataloged symbols that, translated through a combination of old ciphers and local folklore, seemed to predict the sack of Rome in 1527 with eerie precision, years before the first invaders ever appeared at the city gates. Some of the most unsettling examples came from France, in the notorious Conciergerie. Here, the walls of certain cells held rows of intersecting arrows and hourglass shapes, which only made sense decades later, when those very hallways ran red during the Reign of Terror. Prison authorities and church officials, always on guard against heresy and sedition, tried to suppress knowledge of these prophetic walls. They whitewashed cells, ordered entire wings bricked over, or simply destroyed suspicious inscriptions as soon as they were discovered. But the phenomenon proved impossible to erase. In fact, some prisoners began to play into the fear, scratching even more cryptic designs and codes, hoping to drive their captors to paranoia. Not all of these were truly prophetic. Many were nothing more than desperate gambles, a last act of defiance. But now and then, a sequence would later line up perfectly with a disaster, an assassination, a plague, or a scandal that turned a kingdom upside down. It wasn't just the events themselves, but the detail that was so chilling. In one case, a series of spirals carved into a cell wall in Avignon lined up exactly with the number of weeks between the arrest of a bishop and his mysterious poisoning, down to the very day of his death. In Prague's Old Town prison, a lattice of intersecting lines resembled nothing at all until a fire swept through the city, burning entire neighborhoods in the same pattern. Centuries later, researchers compared maps of the burn zone with the old prison wall sketches and found a match that defied coincidence. How did it happen? Theories abound, and each is more disturbing than the last. Some say prisoners, in their isolation, simply became hyper-aware of political tensions and coded warnings into their carvings, confident that disaster would eventually follow. Others insist these were nothing but coincidences, the random shuffle of history finding order where none exists. But the sheer number of matches across time and distance is hard to dismiss. There's a darker hypothesis, too, that the prison itself, its walls, its air, its sense of timelessness, did something to the human mind. Locked away from the rhythms of normal life, cut off from day and night, prisoners may have entered a state of strange, fevered insight. Dreams would become more vivid, thoughts more tangled. In such a place, who's to say the time itself might not fray a little? Perhaps the desperate, broken minds that carved those marks glimpsed something true, a warning, a premonition, or a memory from the wrong side of tomorrow. For the prisoners themselves, carving the walls was a way to assert existence, to resist the erasure of time. Many believed that as long as their mark remained, some part of them would remain alive, able to speak across years. Others saw the act as magic, a spell to bring about change, to curse a captor, or call down rescue. But for a few, it was more sinister, an act of prophecy, a statement that the world outside would not be able to ignore the suffering within forever. Historians have tried to reconstruct the truth by painstakingly cataloging every surviving prison wall in Europe, running statistical analyses on symbol frequency and cross-referencing events. The data is incomplete. Time, war, and restoration have destroyed more than they have preserved, but the records that remain are haunting. Patterns of stars matching the deaths of kings, grids resembling the roots of plague outbreaks, strange animals that appeared in local folklore only after those very symbols were carved. What is perhaps most disturbing is the way these marks refuse to be explained away. Sometimes, a pattern sits dormant for years, meaningless, until suddenly the world shifts and the past clicks into place. It's as if the walls themselves are keeping a record, not just of what happened, but of what must still happen. They are stones trapping the fears and visions of those who suffered most. Visitors to these old prisons often report a feeling of pressure, of being watched, especially near the walls where these symbols appear. Some swear they hear faint whispers, or see fleeting shadows, or feel a chill when they run their fingers across the ancient carvings. Modern-day prisoners, even in renovated cells, have reported vivid dreams echoing the old symbols, as if the visions persist, cycling through generation after generation, no matter how many times the stones are cleaned or replaced. It's easy to dismiss all of this as legend, the desperate imaginings of people with nothing left to lose. But as any historian will tell you, there is a reason every regime, from medieval kings to modern dictators, has tried to silence the voices of prisoners, not just because of what they might say, but because of what they might know. In the silence and solitude of those narrow stone cells, time warps, reality bends, and sometimes the future bleeds backward through the cracks. So the next time you walk through an old prison, pause a moment and look at the walls. Try to imagine the hand that held that iron nail or sharp stone, etching a message that would not make sense for years, maybe centuries. Was it simply madness? Was it a warning? Or was it a glimpse of something we're not meant to see? A reminder that history is not a straight line, but a loop, a spiral, a prison itself, with messages written on the inside, waiting for us to finally read them? In the end, those carvings are not just relics of the past, but warnings for the present, and perhaps, if we're listening closely, prophecies for our future. A cathedral wall was built around a body. No one would exhume. Cathedrals are monuments to faith and ambition, built stone by stone with human sweat, prayers, and centuries of stories buried in their foundations. But beneath the soaring arches and stained glass, secrets linger, some so unsettling that even time cannot erase their chill. Among the strangest, the tale of the cathedral wall built around a body no one dared to exhume, a mystery that turned stone cold and made believers shiver for generations. Picture the scene. It's the late 13th century, and a cathedral is rising at the heart of a bustling medieval city. The site is alive with noise and purpose. Stonecutters carve gargoyles and saints. Laborers haul blocks on aching backs, mud squelching beneath their boots. Bells clang to signal shifts. Dust swirls in shafts of light, and the smell of wet mortar hangs in the air. The walls reach higher with each passing day, every stone a mark of hope and defiance against the darkness beyond the city walls. But on this day, the work stops. A gang of masons, chiseling out space for the next course of limestone, uncovers something unexpected, a hollow cavity in the thick, half-finished wall. Their tools scrape bone, not a stray animal, not a relic in a chest, but the unmistakable form of a human skeleton. Arms folded, skull tilted as if in a final prayer. The workers freeze, fear prickling their skin. Word spreads in seconds. The hum of the site falls silent, swallowed by a rising sense of dread. In the medieval mind, this is no ordinary accident. Bodies belong in consecrated ground, not entombed in the living heart of God's house. The cathedral, meant to be a bridge between earth and heaven, is now a tomb, its sanctity threatened by the unknown. Was this a saint hidden in secret? A criminal walled up in punishment? An old pagan sacrifice, meant to bind the building's spirit? Or something else? Something the records never dared name? Construction halts. Days pass. Clergy are summoned. Some want to exhume the bones and rebury them with prayers and rites. Others whisper that disturbing the remains will curse the whole project, bring down scaffolding, shatter windows, or worse, invite spirits to roam the aisles for all time. The bishop debates. Foremen cross themselves, refusing to go near the wall. Workers mumble about cold drafts in the sunniest part of the choir, the sense of unseen eyes, the feeling that the mortar never quite dries. City rumor mills ignite. Stories spiral. The bones belong to a builder who angered the devil, to a priest who hid treasure and paid the price, to a child walled up as a blessing or warning. Some claim to see shadowy figures move within the stonework at dusk, hear whispers in the morning chill. Others notice the wall itself, how the stone seems forever damp, how candles flicker low nearby, how warmth refuses to linger. Even animals avoid the spot, priests hurry past, and visitors cross themselves as they pass. The official records are vague, careful not to offend faith or fuel fear. They note simply that bones were discovered within the wall and left undisturbed by order of the council. Construction resumes, but the spirit has shifted. Masons work quickly, eyes averted, hands shaking as they seal the cavity. The wall rises, but the memory remains. From that day forward, no one forgets which stones rest atop the unknown dead. Winter comes, and with it a new strangeness. No matter how many candles burn, the wall never loses its chill. Pilgrims shudder as they pray nearby. Old women mutter that prayers echo strangely against the stone. The wall becomes a marker, not just of architectural achievement, but of a secret at the heart of the sacred. Over time, the cathedral is finished, its spires soaring above the rooftops, its bells ringing for centuries. Generations come and go, children grow up hearing the story of the cold wall, of the bones inside that no one would touch. Some brave souls press their hands to the stone, swearing they feel a pulse or a breath from within. Some say it's a guardian, others a warning. For many, it is proof that even the holiest places are never free of the mysteries and shadows of the past. Scholars in later ages debate the tale. Some argue it's myth, a story grown in the telling, born from the fear of death and the allure of secrets hidden in plain sight. Others point to old parish records, faded notes about a delay, a debate, an unnamed skeleton. Some archaeologists find traces of bone dust in odd places, hinting that the legend may be true, but no one ever finds the full remains. The wall, sealed tight, keeps its secret. To this day, if you stand in a certain cathedral, in a certain aisle, you can feel it. The light dims, the air grows cold, your footsteps echo oddly against the stones. It is as if the past is whispering, just beyond the threshold, reminding you that all human endeavors, no matter how grand, are built atop bones and mysteries we cannot ever truly lay to rest. The wall stands as both a testament and a warning. In the struggle to reach toward heaven, humanity carries the weight of what it cannot explain, cannot name, cannot bear to disturb. The cathedral endures, beautiful and solemn, and in its coldest shadow, the bones of the forgotten still wait, silent witnesses to the price paid for every leap of faith. Voices were heard in the chapel wall after a secret massacre. It begins with silence, a silence so deep, so absolute, that even the birds outside the old chapel hesitate in their song. You stand in the shadow of crumbling stone, the air thick with incense and dust, light falling in thin beams through narrow windows streaked with centuries of grime. This chapel has seen countless prayers and secrets, but nothing quite like the night the walls themselves began to whisper. Beneath your feet, the stones are cold and worn. Few in the village speak of what happened here, but the old ones remember. They remember the voices that came from the walls, and the night the chanting rose after the massacre that everyone tried to forget. The story begins in a time of fear, a time when the line between heresy and faith was razor thin, and suspicion itself could be a death sentence. In towns scattered across the countryside, whispers of forbidden beliefs moved like a sickness. The church's grip was tightening. Anyone who strayed from orthodoxy faced suspicion, interrogation, and sometimes worse. In this particular town, a group of men and women had come under scrutiny. Some said they met in secret, that they read from banned texts, that their prayers diverged from the script of Rome. To the outside world, they were quiet, devout. But to the authorities, they were a danger. One night, under a sky crowded with restless clouds, the group vanished. They were summoned to the chapel for questioning, but they never returned. In the days that followed, rumors crawled through the village. Some saw soldiers arriving by torchlight. Others heard screams stifled behind heavy doors. The next morning, the chapel stood quiet and undisturbed, its doors locked, the altar polished, as if nothing had happened. The official story was silence. The church recorded nothing. No graves were dug, no names spoken. It was as if these men and women had simply ceased to exist. But the village remembered. And then, the voices began. At first, it was a trick of the wind, or so people told themselves. a faint sound, like chanting, drifting through the chapel on nights when the moon hung low. It grew louder as the weeks passed. Parishioners reported hearing whispers during Mass, a low, mournful melody that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The priest, shaken, dismissed it as superstition. But soon the entire congregation was straining to listen, hearts pounding as ancient stones began to sing in a language no one dared to recognize. What was it? Guilt? Memory? Something stranger? The monks sent to investigate heard the voices too. A chorus, rising and falling, echoing with the cadence of a forbidden liturgy. Some nights it was almost beautiful. Other nights it curdled the blood. The sound grew strongest near the altar, in the floor's oldest stones, beneath which no one dared to dig. The bishop was summoned, and even he could not deny the phenomenon. Still, he ordered silence. He forbade discussion, threatened excommunication for those who spread tales of the voices in the walls. But the chapel had its own memory, one carved not in parchment, but in bone and blood and stone. The legend took root. The souls of the vanished heretics had become trapped within the very walls that bore witness to their fate. Their final prayers, their last songs, seeped into the stone as their bodies were hidden below. Every Mass became a negotiation with the past, every prayer shadowed by the chorus of the betrayed. The haunting did not fade. Instead, it grew. A stain no holy water could wash away. Children refused to enter the chapel after dark. Old men made the sign of the cross before stepping inside. Some parishioners claimed to see pale shapes drifting through the candle smoke. Others heard the floor itself creak and sigh, as if shifting under a secret weight. It became known as the Chapel of Whispers. People traveled from distant villages to hear the unearthly music, to feel the air grow cold when the voices rose. Desperate to end the rumors, church authorities sent workers to repair the floor, hoping to erase the past by replacing the ancient stones. As the old flagstones were lifted, a hush fell over the village. The workers labored in silence, glancing at one another whenever the wind howled or the shadows seemed to move. Beneath the floor, they found earth disturbed, but no clear evidence of the dead. Only a chill that never left, and a sense that something had been sealed away, unseen, unspoken. And then, as suddenly as it began, the chanting ceased. The walls grew silent. The air in the chapel felt lighter, the light brighter, the unease fading as if the stones themselves had finally been allowed to forget. The bishop declared the matter closed and the town returned to uneasy normalcy. But no one truly forgot. In the years that followed, whenever tragedy struck or rumors of heresy returned, the old ones would lower their voices and remember the time when the dead sang in the walls. Historians have puzzled over the tale for centuries. Some say it was mass hysteria, a product of fear and guilt in a time when belief and terror walked hand in hand. Others have pointed to strange acoustics, or to the possibility of buried bodies creating air channels that funneled sound. But for those who were there, no rational explanation could erase the memory of the chanting, or the feeling that the chapel itself was alive with sorrow and accusation. In the world of the Middle Ages, the line between the natural and the supernatural was always blurred. Walls could remember, stones could bear witness, the dead could speak, and the living had to listen. The story of the chapel and its voices became a warning about secrets buried too deep, about justice denied, about the persistence of memory in a world where the truth could not be safely laid to rest. And so, every time the chapel bells toll, there are some who still pause and listen, waiting for a whisper, a fragment of forbidden song rising from the walls. They wonder what is left behind when the past is buried, but not forgiven, when stones become the keepers of secrets too dangerous to name. In the quiet of the old chapel, memory lingers still, in the cracks of the walls, in the bones of the floor, and in the silence that speaks volumes long after the voices are gone. A knight's final words were etched in stone without tools. Beneath the shadow of ancient battlements, in a walled garden so overgrown that time itself seemed to coil around every root and stone, an event took place that has defied all logic, haunted generations, and blurred the line between the ordinary and the miraculous. This is not just a story of death, nor merely a legend carved by superstitious tongues. Tonight you will hear the true account of the dying knight whose final words appeared overnight, inscribed into unyielding stone, etched as if by invisible hands. It begins in the dying light of late spring, sometime in the early 15th century, at a fortified manor deep in the English countryside. The world outside is unraveling. War, disease, and uncertainty at every turn. But in this garden, tucked between the ivy-choked wall and a lone yew tree, the air is thick with anticipation. A knight, mortally wounded in a border skirmish, has been carried from the battlefield by squires who can do little but watch as life drains from his body. His armor is dented, blood seeps through the rivets, but his gaze is fixed, not on his wounds nor on the men gathered around him, but on the garden wall beside him. Those present that night later testified to the intensity of his eyes. He was in pain, yes, but more than that, he seemed possessed by some urgent purpose. He beckoned for water, which he barely sipped. He asked for a priest, who hurriedly administered last rites. But as dusk gave way to darkness, the knight began to whisper. Some accounts say he spoke prayers. Others claim he recited lines of poetry or words meant for a distant love. But all agree that as the moon rose, his words became deliberate, clear, and heartbreakingly final. The squires did not understand the full weight of those sentences until the next day. All they could do was listen, some recording fragments in their own memories, others distracted by the steady march of death so familiar to medieval life. Before midnight, the knight was gone, his hand resting on the mossy stone of the garden wall, his voice silenced forever. At dawn, the household awoke to news of his passing. The body was shrouded, prayers were murmured, and the priest prepared a grave. But as the sunlight crept across the garden, one of the youngest squires noticed something strange where the knight had lain. The smooth, weathered stone of the wall, untouched for generations, worn flat by centuries of wind and rain, now bore a line of text, not scratched, not gouged, but engraved in a script so flawless that it looked as if the stone itself had softened and accepted the words like wax. The words, translated from Middle English, read, "My honor and heart remain, though I cross beyond this wall." Below, a single name, the knight's, rendered in calligraphy no chisel could achieve. No roughness, no sign of tool marks, not even the faintest trace of dust or debris. The inscription shimmered in the morning light, fresh and ancient all at once. Panic, awe, and suspicion swept through the manor. The Lord ordered the stone examined. Blacksmiths, stonemasons, and even traveling scholars were summoned over the weeks that followed. They all agreed no human hand could have wrought those lines so cleanly, especially in so short a time. The surface showed no evidence of having been carved or abraded. If the words had been scorched or painted, they would have faded. If cut, there would be splinters or chips. Instead, the letters were part of the stone itself, as if grown there overnight. In medieval Europe, miracles and omens were not merely stories, they were facts of life. Villagers would journey for days to glimpse relics or touch walls said to bleed or weep. But this was different. This was not a mark for the masses, but an intimate testament left in a private garden. Whispers spread that the knight had bargained with God, or, less charitably, with something darker, for one last message to endure after his flesh had failed. Some said it was the work of angels, divine proof that honor survives even death. Others murmured that the knight had learned forbidden secrets during his campaigns, and in his last moments, unleashed power best left unknown. There were even tales that the wall itself was ancient, predating the manor, once part of a forgotten temple or druidic circle, and that it responded only to those who knew its true name. Yet the manor's priest, skeptical and scholarly, kept a detailed chronicle. He noted the smoothness of the inscription, the uncanny perfection of each letter, the way dew never collected on the lines but always traced around them. He tried to copy the text onto parchment, but found that no ink, no pigment, no tool could quite match the clarity of the original. He confessed in his journal, "I fear we stand before a work not of this world, but neither wholly apart from it." Years passed. The knight's grave became a place of pilgrimage, not just for those who sought miracles, but for poets, scribes, and the lonely. The wall, too, became legendary. There were those who believed that to touch the letters was to gain courage, or to dream of loved ones lost. Others claimed that the wall would only accept the words of the truly honorable, and that anyone else who died beside it would leave nothing but dust behind. In the centuries since, the manor has crumbled and the garden has gone wild. Ivy has all but swallowed the wall, but on certain days, when the light is just right, the inscription still glimmers, untouched by rain, wind, or the slow decay of time. Archaeologists have taken rubbings, geologists have analyzed the stone, and yet no one has explained how those words came to be. Some samples suggest that the very minerals in the rock change structure along the lines of the inscription, as if the words had been whispered not just to the world, but into the atomic fabric of the earth itself. The story of the knight's final words has lived on in song, in legend, in hushed conversations by fireside, and in lonely churches where doubt lingers. Was it a miracle? Proof that some truths are stronger than death? Was it an act of forbidden magic, or the last gasp of a soul so desperate to be remembered that it imprinted its farewell on stone? Or is there a stranger explanation still? Some believe the mind and world are more connected than we know, that consciousness under the right conditions can reach beyond bone and sinew, leaving an imprint on matter itself. If so, then perhaps what happened in that walled garden is less a message from the gods, and more, a message from one man's unbreakable will, a final refusal to be erased, a last word made permanent not by tools, but by longing. In the end, what matters is not how the words appeared, but that they remain. Long after the knight's body has faded to dust, long after the stones have forgotten the footsteps of all who walked those gardens, his message persists. My honor and heart remain, though I cross beyond this wall. It's a truth that every listener, every soul who has loved and lost, carries somewhere inside. Sometimes, the most lasting stories are not written with ink or steel, but with the stubborn hope that memory can outlast even the hardest stone. The wall behind the throne was found to be a hollow listening chamber. Imagine stepping into the heart of a medieval palace, a chamber built not for the masses, but for the select few. Gilded banners hang silent above, torchlight flickers along painted stone, and at the very center sits the throne, the seat of a king, a place where decisions that shaped entire nations were made in the hush between heartbeats. But what if I told you that even here, in the one room meant for the deepest privacy, the king was never truly alone, that every word, every sigh, every whispered command was heard by someone hiding just behind the wall, watching, listening, waiting. This is not legend. It is a piece of history uncovered not by rumor or suspicion, but by accident centuries after the last royal breath faded from the stone. It begins with a detail so small, most visitors would never notice it. The wall behind the throne seemed wrong, soft somehow. No echo, no return of footsteps or voice. For generations, nobody thought much of it. Stones settle, acoustics shift. But as the centuries passed and the kingdom faded, the palace was abandoned, left to dust and the slow gnaw of time. In the late 19th century, restoration work began. As masons chipped away at damp plaster and crumbling mortar, one struck a hollow pocket in the wall behind the throne. The sound, empty, almost musical, brought the work to a halt. What the workers found was no mere flaw. They uncovered a narrow passage, cleverly disguised, barely wide enough for a man to slip through sideways. It stretched the length of the king's private hall, hidden entirely within the wall, with a series of small slits, impossibly old, positioned just above ear level, opening onto the back of the throne's dais. Historians, called to the site in a rush of excitement and fear, realized what this meant almost immediately. The so-called listening wall was not an accident of medieval construction, but a deliberate tool. It was a place where spies, handpicked by the king's enemies, or perhaps by the king himself, could eavesdrop on every word spoken in the throne room. In an era where a careless phrase could bring down dynasties, information was the most valuable currency of all. But how had such a secret survived the centuries, hidden in plain sight? To answer that, you have to understand the world in which these walls were built. Medieval courts were more than places of pageantry and power. They were battlegrounds of invisible war. Nobles schemed, clerics plotted, foreign agents slipped among the king's staff. Every alliance was double-edged, every trusted servant a possible traitor. The king ruled from his throne, but he was surrounded at all times by faces he could not fully trust. Paranoia was not weakness, it was survival. The very architecture of the royal hall reflected this climate of suspicion. While the front of the throne room was built for spectacle, audiences, ceremonies, displays of strength, the back was layered with deception. The hollow listening chamber was constructed with breathtaking care. The entryway, discovered hidden behind a false fireplace in a distant side room, could only be opened by releasing a pressure stone carved with an inconspicuous crest. Within the passage, sound was carried with uncanny clarity. The smallest whisper near the throne was funneled through the slits, amplified by the stone, and delivered directly to whoever crouched in darkness behind. In the dust of centuries, archaeologists found scraps, a child's shoe, a wax tablet etched with hurried notes, even a ceramic cup marked with the seal of a minor noble. Who sat in the dark, listening night after night? Was it the king's spy master, gathering rumors to protect the crown? Or perhaps an agent of an ambitious rival, waiting for the moment when a secret slip of the tongue could doom the throne? The answer is lost to time, but the presence of such relics suggests this passage saw regular and clandestine use. The recovered royal records, once compared with the palace's architectural secrets, tell a story of intrigue so dense it's almost impossible to untangle. There are references to a silent witness, who always seemed to know when conspiracies were afoot. Plots were uncovered just before they could be set in motion. Traitors arrested mere hours after whispered confessions. No one outside the king's tightest circle ever knew how. The palace priests blamed divine providence, but the real answer, it seems, was stone, mortar, and the cold patience of those who hid within them. For the king, this listening chamber was both shield and weapon. Some historians believe the monarch himself sometimes ordered trusted courtiers to sit in the wall during council meetings, not just to catch treason, but to test the loyalty of those closest to him. The knowledge that the walls had ears, sometimes literally, changed the way men spoke, the way they thought, even the way they felt safe in their own skin. In time, rumors of the throne's curse, that secrets told there would never stay secret, spread through the court, making the act of speaking in the royal presence a kind of confession. But there is another side to this story, and it is not one of royal power, but of human vulnerability. The men and women who spied from behind the wall were not all willing. Punishments for betrayal were severe. Being pressed into service as a palace spy was both a threat and a promise. Some of the notes recovered in the passage hint at desperation. Short prayers for safety, cryptic warnings, do not trust the golden chain. He knows. They listen from behind. The fear inside those walls was just as real as the fear on the throne. Over the centuries, as kings fell and new dynasties rose, the knowledge of the listening chamber was buried, first in secret, then by accident. As walls were thickened, rooms rebuilt, passages sealed. By the time the restoration workers opened the hollow wall, the very purpose of the chamber had faded from living memory. Yet the structure remained, proof that, in the age of faith and steel, power was always shadowed by paranoia, and no ruler, no matter how mighty, was ever truly alone. Standing in the ruined hall today, you can still see the subtle marks where stone was shaped to carry sound, the narrow slits masked by centuries of plaster. If you press your ear to the cold surface, you might imagine the whispered echoes of ancient schemes, the quickened breath of spies holding their silence, the restless shift of a monarch who senses he is always being watched. The throne is empty now, the power long gone, but the wall, once thought to be solid, has a hollow at its heart, a silent testament to the truth that in the game of power, trust is an illusion, and the greatest secrets are never truly safe. In the end, the wall behind the throne is more than just a clever piece of medieval engineering. It's a mirror held up to every age of ambition and suspicion, a reminder that even the mightiest can be made vulnerable by what they do not see, and that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the one who storms the gates, but the one who listens in the dark, waiting for your guard to fall. So next time you hear the phrase, "the walls have ears," remember this. Sometimes they really do. And if you ever find yourself in the presence of power, speaking secrets in a chamber you believe is yours alone, look to the walls. You may not be as alone as you think. A courtyard wall was removed and revealed, hundreds of eyes carved in the heart of a forgotten city, a place where most modern maps have smudged out its old boundaries, and the world has hurried past. There once stood a sprawling courtyard, surrounded on all sides by walls of weathered stone. For centuries, this space had served as a silent witness to the ebb and flow of history. Markets and executions, royal proclamations and secret meetings, joyous celebrations and sudden, shattering betrayals. The stones themselves seemed to hold memory, but no one suspected just how literal that would become until the day that reconstruction workers arrived, ready to restore what little remained of this ancient place. It was an unremarkable afternoon at first. Sunlight baked the cracked earth, dust hung thick in the air, and the workers, accustomed to the slow rhythm of demolition, went about their business prying loose the old mortar-clogged stones one by one. But as they removed the first section of the inner courtyard wall, a hush fell. A single worker called out, not in pain or fear, but in disbelief. The wall's hidden face, the side that had been sealed away for centuries, was not blank. Instead, staring back at them from nearly every brick were hundreds upon hundreds of eyes, human eyes, meticulously carved, each distinct, each lifelike, each caught in the act of witnessing. They were not childish doodles or haphazard graffiti. The eyes were deeply incised with skill and care, some wide with terror, others narrowed with suspicion, some seeming to mourn, some even to judge. Irises, lashes, crow's feet, wrinkles. Each eye was unique, crafted as if from memory, or perhaps even from life. Some were so realistic that workers felt, for a moment, as if they had been caught spying on a gathering of silent observers. The effect was overwhelming. Even hardened stonemasons found themselves unable to continue, standing in the dust with their tools slack in their hands, shivering despite the heat. Word spread quickly. Local historians, archaeologists, and eventually reporters converged on the site. Theories sprang up overnight. Was this a forgotten cult? An ancient ritual? Or a warning meant for future generations? For weeks, researchers cataloged each eye, noting their subtle variations. They found old legends whispered by the city's oldest families, stories of a time when the courtyard was used as a place of judgment, a court not just of law, but of public opinion, where the accused would be brought before the assembled townspeople. In these tales, justice was not handed down by a distant magistrate, but by the crowd itself, whose gaze decided fates with a wordless vote. Did those condemned to die feel the weight of so many eyes upon them? Real or carved? No one could say. The oldest stones, dated by their mortar and tool marks, suggested the wall had been constructed during a period of brutal unrest, perhaps as a response to a wave of betrayals or accusations that swept through the city. There was speculation that the eyes were carved by those who'd been forced to watch friends and neighbors dragged away, each etching becoming a silent act of witness, a way of saying, "I saw, I remember." Others thought the carvings might have been the work of a single obsessive artisan, hired or compelled to immortalize the town's ever-watchful gaze. But the most haunting theory came from a handful of folklorists. They traced echoes of this phenomenon to stories much older than the city itself. Ancient superstitions about the power of being watched. In times of plague, famine, or fear, people believed that carving an eye could ward off evil, stop injustice, or prevent betrayal. In other legends, the eyes were meant to trap the souls of the guilty, condemning them to haunt the place of their crime forever, unable to look away. Here, then, was a wall not just of stone, but of memory, guilt, vigilance, a wall meant to make the living feel eternally observed, unable to hide from the collective memory of their community. The workers, now uneasy, spoke quietly of feeling watched at all hours. Some claimed to see the eyes flicker in the corner of their vision, or to feel a prickle on the back of their neck as they worked. No one wanted to be alone near the wall at night. The project slowed, with some quitting, unable to bear the silent scrutiny. But the wall had already begun to change the town, stirring up old memories, old grievances, as if the act of uncovering it had loosed something dormant. Locals, coming to view the site, often wept or turned away, saying the eyes reminded them of someone lost, someone wronged. A few even swore they recognized a pair of eyes as belonging to an ancestor, a distant cousin, a family secret no one had spoken of in generations. The atmosphere became so intense that city officials debated whether to cover the wall again or preserve it as a monument, an uneasy reminder that history never truly looks away. As days passed and historians pored over the records, patterns emerged. Some eyes seemed to be grouped in 3s or 5s, recalling old judicial rituals. Others bore strange markings in their pupils, cryptic symbols that matched nothing in any known language. There were rumors that, during one terrible winter, townspeople accused of witchcraft had been paraded in front of this very wall, forced to endure the judgment of their peers, watched, both literally and symbolically, by all who had come before. Even as centuries passed and regimes changed, the urge to bear witness, to hold the guilty and the innocent alike, under an unblinking gaze, survived in stone. No one ever determined for certain who carved the eyes, or exactly why. But as the sun set each evening and shadows stretched across the courtyard, the effect remained the same. Those countless eyes staring outward in mute accusation seemed to demand not just remembrance, but reckoning. Every person who stood before them felt the old, unspoken question: what have you seen? What will you choose to forget? And what will the walls remember long after you're gone? Even now, long after the last worker left and the news faded, the wall remains, a testament not only to the strangeness of the past, but to the inescapable presence of memory. History is not just written by the victors or carved in monuments to the powerful. Sometimes, it is etched in secret on the hidden sides of walls by those desperate to remember and to be remembered. In a way, those eyes are still watching, waiting for someone, someday, to truly see. Masons claimed a wall wouldn't set until a secret was spoken aloud. Every stone city has a gate, a threshold between safety and danger, between the known and the unknown. In medieval times, a city's gate wasn't just an entryway. It was a test of engineering, faith, and sometimes the unexplainable. There are stories, nearly lost to time, of gates that would not stand no matter how carefully they were built, of walls that seemed cursed to collapse until a secret, spoken in shadow, finally made them hold. It is late autumn, somewhere in a city of high walls and uneasy hearts. The city is growing, and its leaders demand a new gateway, a monument to their strength and prosperity. Master masons are summoned from distant towns, men renowned for skill, with hands worn by decades of stonework. The site is chosen, plans drawn, and for days the air fills with the ringing of chisels and the rumble of carts. Dust coats the cobblestones, children peer between scaffolds, and the whole city hums with anticipation. The foundation is laid, the stones lifted and fitted, the first arch rises. But then, in the darkness before dawn, it collapses, stones tumbling like dice, mortar crumbling to powder. It is an omen, say the elders. Just bad luck, say the builders. The next day, the work begins anew. The second attempt is slower, measured. Each stone is blessed by a priest, every joint double-checked. Yet again, as the last block is set, the wall shudders and falls, scattering fragments across the square. Whispers run through the city. Some say the ground is cursed, an old graveyard, or a pagan site best left undisturbed. Others blame jealous rivals, witches, the envy of neighboring towns. Masons argue late into the night, checking measurements and blaming faulty lime, yet nothing is found. The third attempt begins with dread. Work slows. Men cross themselves before each lift. The foreman loses sleep, haunted by dreams of falling stones and laughter in the shadows. Once more, the wall climbs skyward, each stone placed with growing unease. On the eve of completion, a storm rolls in, winds howling down the narrow streets. As lightning flashes, the city wakes to the sound of ruin. The wall has fallen a third time. Despair hangs over the square like a shroud. Men refuse to return. Priests fast and pray. Merchants threaten to withdraw funding. The city's patience and hope begins to rot. And yet, in the midst of this crisis, one mason remains calm. He is old, quiet, with eyes that have seen too many winters and a memory full of stories best left untold. He asks for a night alone at the gate. Reluctantly, the foreman agrees. The city sleeps fitfully while the old mason works by lantern light, tools ringing softly, lips moving in a whisper only the stones can hear. In the deepest hour, he pauses. He bends close to the unfinished wall, lays his hand upon it, and leans in. No one is there to witness what he says. Some claim they heard a low murmur, like a prayer or a confession. Others, years later, swear he chanted in a language older than Latin, or spoke the true name of the city, or revealed a secret no living person was meant to know. When dawn breaks, the old mason is gone. Some say he left before sunrise, others that he simply vanished. The only sign of his presence is a new calm in the air and the wall itself, unchanged in appearance, yet different, somehow, as if settled in its bones. Work resumes. This time, the wall holds. Mortar sets quickly. Stones seem to fit themselves. When the gate is finished, it stands straighter and stronger than anyone imagined. Years pass, then decades, and still the wall does not crack or crumble. Travelers marvel at its perfection. Townsfolk grow proud. The story of the 3 collapses and the whispered secret becomes a local legend, told to children and scribbled in the margins of parish records. What was the secret? No one knows. The old mason took it with him. Some say it was a truth about the land, something to appease restless spirits. Others claim it was a vow or a curse, binding the city to its destiny. There are those who believe he simply confessed his greatest sin, or forgave an old enemy, or made a bargain with the stones themselves. A few suggest he spoke a word of love, or regret, or hope. Whatever it was, the wall responded, and from that day on, nothing could move it. Over centuries, the city changed. Wars came and went, plagues swept through, rulers rose and fell, but the gate remained, untouched by time, unmoved by storm or siege. When engineers in later ages studied the wall, they found no fault in its design. The stones were ordinary, the mortar no different from any other. Only the legend lingered that a wall, like a soul, sometimes needs a secret to stand. If you walk through that old gate now, you might feel it, a hush, a weight in the air, the echo of a voice long gone. People say the wall is never cold, that it hums in the rain, that birds will not nest on its ledges. Some stop to whisper their own secrets to the stones, hoping for luck, or forgiveness, or strength. In this way, the old mason's ritual continues, echoing through the years. There are things in this world that cannot be measured or explained, mysteries held in brick and bone, secrets spoken to keep the darkness at bay. Sometimes, all it takes is a word, softly uttered in the night, to bind a city's fate and hold its walls for 1,000 years. Ancient wall symbols reappeared after they were erased by order. The story begins in an age when walls were more than stone and mortar. They were memory itself, silent witnesses to every secret and sacred act. Picture a cold, dim sanctuary at the heart of a medieval city. The walls of this ancient chapel are thick and worn, covered in layers of faded frescoes, painted saints, and old, half-remembered symbols. In the flickering candlelight, these marks seem to move, telling stories no tongue dares to repeat. For centuries, pilgrims and townsfolk alike have traced their fingers along these lines, seeking blessings or secrets. And then suddenly, by order of those in power, the most mysterious of these symbols are erased, chiseled away, painted over, banned by decree, gone. Or so it seems. The order comes down with all the weight of law and fear. Perhaps it is a bishop's command, a noble's suspicion, or the rising panic of churchmen who see heresy in every shadow. The symbols. Some say they are runes, others that they are pagan, others that they are marks of an older, secret faith, are declared blasphemous. Artists are summoned, their hands trembling, to scrape and plaster, to whitewash and cover every trace. The townsfolk watch in anxious silence. Some feel relief, others grief, and a few nurse secret resentment. The chapel grows cold, its history stripped away in the name of purity and power. Days pass, the wall is smooth and blank. The officials move on, content that order is restored and heresy banished. But the air has changed. There is a heaviness that no lime or paint can hide. The oldest among the villagers whisper that the wall remembers, that sacred marks cannot so easily be erased. They say every stone has a soul, a memory of what has passed upon its surface. Then, as the seasons shift, something uncanny happens. It starts with a rumor, a flicker in the candlelight, a suggestion of lines and curves beneath the paint. A child, kneeling in prayer, glances up and thinks she sees a faint pattern, a shape that should not be there. The next day, others notice it too. At first, the marks are so subtle they can only be seen at dawn or dusk, when the low light grazes the wall and reveals secrets hidden from midday eyes. With each week, the lines become clearer, as if the wall itself is struggling to recall what was taken from it. Panic grows. Artists and laborers are summoned again, this time questioned fiercely. Who has dared to redraw the forbidden signs? But the answer is always the same: no one. The plasterers swear on their souls that they have not returned. The painters refuse to even enter the chapel at night. Some even claim to be afraid, haunted by dreams of stone dust and whispers in the darkness. The priest, desperate, orders more whitewash, more prayers, more vigilance. But each time the wall is scrubbed, the marks fade only to reappear again. Faint, almost spectral, but unmistakable. Soon, the entire town is talking. Some say it is a miracle, a sign from God or the saints, a warning against hubris and the arrogance of men who believe they can erase the sacred past. Others whisper that darker forces are at work, that the symbols are the language of spirits, or remnants of a curse placed long before the chapel was ever built. The tension in the village grows. Pilgrims arrive to see the miracle wall. Skeptics come to scoff, but even they fall silent in the presence of the reappearing marks. The local authorities, threatened by what they cannot control, resort to intimidation. Artists and laborers are watched, their every movement scrutinized. Night after night, guards stand vigil in the chapel, but nothing is seen. No trespasser, no furtive hand with a brush or chisel. And yet, in the morning the symbols are still there, clearer than before. It is as if the wall itself is alive, as if history has become a living thing, pushing its way back into the present, no matter how fiercely it is suppressed. The legend grows. Some monks claim to decipher fragments of ancient writing in the lines. Prayers for protection, curses against invaders, pleas for the dead. Others insist the marks are older still, predating Christianity, a glimpse of a forgotten world where belief was written in stone and could not be washed away by decree. The chapel becomes a place of uneasy reverence and fear, a testament to the power of memory, of art, of the unseen currents that flow beneath the surface of ordinary life. Years pass, but the story never fades. Each generation adds its own layer of interpretation. The wall becomes a symbol itself, a reminder that history cannot be truly erased, that what is written, drawn, or believed will find a way to return. Even now, in quiet corners, the story is told of the sacred wall, the forbidden symbols, and the power that dwells in places too old to forget. For the modern mind, there are explanations. Lime that bleeds, paint that flakes, the ghost of a mural seeping through from beneath. But in the deep silence of the chapel, where centuries crowd together, those explanations seem small. The wall remains, a canvas for belief, for fear, for the insistence that some truths, once made manifest, can never be fully buried. The villagers come to see, some with awe, others with dread. The symbols shimmer faintly in the light, promising that what is suppressed will return, that memory is carved deeper than any decree can reach. So the next time you pass an old wall, pause and look closely. You may see more than age or damage. You may glimpse the persistence of the past, the will of history to reassert itself, the strange and stubborn life of memory. Because in the end, a wall is never just stone. Sometimes it is the soul of a place, forever striving to speak what others wish forgotten. The wall that refused to hold paint until justice was done. Let's begin with a wall, not the proud towering ramparts that keep armies at bay, but a simple plaster wall in a medieval town square, unremarkable except for the secret it held. The event I'm about to describe is not just a legend or a superstitious fable. It is woven into the town's historical records, mentioned in passing by chroniclers and monks, but whispered about by generations, who swore they'd seen it with their own eyes. The tale of the wall that refused to keep its paint until justice was served. A story that speaks not only to the mysteries of stone and pigment, but to the relentless, patient way truth demands to be known. The year was 1489, in the bustling market town of Valenfort, a place where rumors traveled faster than the carts that clattered down its narrow, muddy streets. The town's justice hall faced the central square, and its whitewashed walls were a canvas for official proclamations, for portraits of local heroes, and, on occasion, for murals meant to immortalize recent events. That spring, a prominent artist was commissioned by the town elders to paint a mural commemorating the capture and trial of a man accused of a terrible crime, a theft from the local church, one that had shaken the faith and security of the entire community. The accused, a humble cooper named Gerhard, was not a stranger to the town. He'd fixed barrels for the taverns, mended casks for the brewer, and was known to donate the odd coin to the beggars that slept beneath the eaves. But one night, a relic was stolen from the church's altar, a small gilded cross, and Gerhardt was found nearby, dazed, confused, and unable to account for his presence. The town needed a villain. They needed an ending, and Gerhardt, unable to defend himself, was condemned in the court of public opinion before his trial had even begun. The mural was to be painted on the outer wall of the Justice Hall, facing the market where every passerby would see it. A vivid, permanent warning to those tempted by sin. The artist, eager to please his patrons, worked through the week, sketching the scene with charcoal, the dim church interior, the glittering relic, and at its center, Gerhardt, hunched and shadowed, his features twisted in shame. He mixed his pigments with care, using the finest lime wash and mineral colors available. The first day, he painted until dusk, satisfied with his progress, convinced that his brushstrokes would last as long as the wall itself. But when the sun rose the next morning, the mural was gone. Not faded, not vandalized. Gone. The paint had bubbled and peeled away, flaking off the wall in papery sheets. Only the blank, pitted plaster remained, as if it had never been touched. The artist, bewildered and embarrassed, assumed he'd made a mistake with the lime, or the weather had played a cruel trick. He scraped, replastered, and began again. He was watched by townsfolk and elders alike, who muttered that perhaps the spirits objected to painting at dusk, or the subject was too grim for holy ground. Again he painted, more carefully this time. He finished well before sunset, covering the wall with thick, vibrant color. But the following morning the result was the same. The image had vanished, the paint curled at the base of the wall like old birch bark. Whispers began to circulate. Some said Gerhardt had cursed the wall. Others muttered about the relic's sanctity. A few, mostly the women who had received kindness from Gerhardt, began to murmur a more dangerous thought, that the wall itself was protesting injustice. As the days passed, the artist tried everything. He altered his pigments. He called on apprentices to help. He painted by candlelight, by daylight, even by moonlight. Each time, the mural vanished by morning. Some nights, people claimed to hear strange sounds coming from the wall, a crackling, a whispering, a sigh as though the stone itself was restless, unable to sleep with the weight of a lie painted on its face. Meanwhile, Gerhardt languished in the town's jail. His protestations of innocence grew weaker as his fate seemed sealed not just by human judgment, but by the very stones of the town. Yet, quietly, doubt crept in. The priest who knew Gerhardt's gentle nature, the innkeeper who'd seen him praying the night of the theft, the baker who remembered a strange traveler in the square at dusk, gone by morning. Slowly, a few townsfolk began to investigate, driven by the stubborn refusal of the mural to take root. One night, a group of Gerhardt's neighbors found evidence, a piece of the stolen relic tucked beneath a loose stone near the well, far from where Gerhardt had been found. Another merchant recalled the traveler's accent, which did not match anyone from the town. With new suspicion cast on the case, the council reluctantly reopened the investigation. Days passed. Testimony shifted. The town's anger began to turn, not toward Gerhardt, but toward the real culprit, a passing stranger, long since fled. Finally, under growing pressure and the certainty that an injustice had been done, the council formally acquitted Gerhardt. He was led from his cell, trembling, stunned, to the cheers and apologies of those who had so quickly condemned him. That very night, the artist, weary but moved by the turn of events, was asked to try once more to paint the mural, this time not of Gerhardt's shame, but of his vindication. The townsfolk gathered to watch as he depicted the scene anew. Gerhardt freed, embraced by his friends, the real thief already a fading shadow in the background. This time, the paint clung to the wall. The colors dried smooth and brilliant. The mural endured through storms, through seasons, through the slow gnaw of time. Not a single flake came away, no matter how many winters battered the plaster or how many eyes rested on the painting. It remained a testament, not just to Gerhardt's innocence, but to the strange, stubborn way the world itself sometimes seems to resist injustice, refusing to immortalize a lie when the truth is still struggling to be heard. For generations, townspeople would tell visitors about the wall that rejected falsehood and accepted only justice. Mothers would bring their children to see it, whispering that honesty always prevails, even when all seems lost. Scholars would puzzle over the chemistry. priests over the miracle, skeptics over the coincidence. But those who'd lived through it, the artist, the elders, and Gerhardt himself, knew in their bones that some walls are more than mortar and stone. Some walls remember. Some walls demand truth. Long after the mural had faded into legend, after the Justice Hall was rebuilt and the market square repaved, old men and women would still speak of that spring when the very stones seemed to take sides, when paint became more than color, when it became conscience. When a wall, silent and unyielding, told the town that justice, no matter how long denied, could not be covered over. And so, the story endures. Whenever you pass by an old wall, one that looks as if it's seen too much, heard too many secrets, remember, sometimes it is the stone itself that stands watch over what's right and what's wrong, refusing to bear false witness, holding out for truth until the last brushstroke finally reveals what should have been seen all along. A hidden passage behind a wall led to a room with clocks that never moved. In the grand echoing halls of old European estates, there are secrets sealed away by more than just stone and wood. Some secrets are so strange, so stubborn, that they survive the centuries, locked, waiting for the rare moment when accident or curiosity sets them free. Picture an estate on the outskirts of a mist-shrouded forest, its walls heavy with centuries of noble history. For generations, the house had been lived in, but one particular wall on the upper floor felt wrong. Guests whispered of cold spots, a faint ticking, or an odd, heavy silence when they walked by. It was a place children were dared to touch, and servants hurried past, their eyes averted. No one knew why until renovation work revealed the truth. The discovery began with an echo, a thump where there should have been solid stone. When the workmen pried at the paneling, dust billowed out, and with it the faint scent of wax and old wood. There was no door, no latch, just a hollow. It took hours to widen the breach, and what the estate's owners found behind was a room that had not seen daylight for perhaps 200 years. Inside was no treasure hoard, no skeleton, no forgotten portrait of a disgraced ancestor. Instead, 5 wooden clocks stood in a neat half-circle facing the far wall. Each was carved from dark walnut, their faces exquisitely painted, the glass long since dulled by age. And on every clock, the hour hand was fixed, forever. At exactly 3 minutes past midnight, none ticked, none moved. The air was impossibly still. At first, it was assumed the clocks had simply run down, their springs exhausted, their gears clogged with dust. But as the estate's caretaker and a local watchmaker soon discovered, nothing would restart them. Fresh oil on the cogs did nothing. Winding keys snapped off in the locks. Even attempts to remove the hands or faces failed. It was as if the wood itself resisted all tampering, as if time itself had simply stopped inside that chamber. It was a mystery as complete as it was unsettling. The origin of the room and its strange cargo proved just as confounding. The estate's archives held no blueprints showing such a chamber. Family records, which stretched back through wars, plagues, and revolutions, never mentioned it. There was no tale of a reclusive clockmaker ancestor, no story of a superstitious noble sealing away bad luck. The only clue was a date, 1788, carved beneath the sill of the smallest clock, and a set of initials, JPL. Beyond that, the past was silent. But in the silence, questions multiplied. Why would someone build a hidden chamber only to fill it with clocks? Why ensure everyone was frozen at exactly the same hour? And why, 3 minutes past midnight, that uncanny moment when one day has ended but the next has barely begun? Some said it was a ritual, that the hour marked a tragedy or a curse. Others suggested it was a way to trap something, a memory, a sin, or even an omen, so it could not escape into the rest of the house. Clocks, after all, have always been more than just machines for measuring time. In the late 18th century, the age of science and superstition overlapped uneasily. People believed clocks could attract spirits, mark the moment of death, or ward off evil if set in a certain pattern. In some households, clocks were stopped at the hour a family member died, their hands never reset. To do otherwise was to risk inviting the spirit back. But this, 5 clocks sealed away, never running again, suggested something larger, something that made even hardened historians shudder. Over the following months, as news of the discovery spread, scholars and journalists visited the estate. Some attempted to explain the mystery away. Perhaps the room was a failed experiment, an eccentric's lost workshop, or a forgotten prank by a previous generation. But no one could explain the feeling that overtook visitors as soon as they stepped inside. The air felt thick, heavy with expectation. Even the estate's bravest dog refused to cross the threshold. Then there were the stories, the ones whispered by servants and passed along at kitchen tables after dark. One claimed that the clocks had once run together, marking the hours for a hidden meeting. Another said that the room had been a sanctuary for a noblewoman whose mind broke one stormy night, her last words lost to time. Yet another tale, older than anyone could recall, spoke of a wager made with the darkness itself, a bargain to halt disaster by stopping time in its tracks. Each story was more fanciful than the last, but each shared the same kernel. Something happened at 3 minutes past midnight, and someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure it would never happen again. Historians, determined to cut through the fog of legend, began to dig. They pored over letters, receipts, and parish records. What emerged was a pattern of deaths: servants, footmen, even a distant cousin, dying unexpectedly over the course of a single winter in 1788. Each was found at dawn, as if sleep had simply become too deep to escape. No cause of death was ever established. After that year, the family line changed. The old lord disappeared from the records, and the estate passed quickly through 3 heirs before falling silent for nearly a decade. The clocks, it seemed, had been set in those shadowed months, maybe as a warning, maybe as a seal, maybe as a silent record of what could never be spoken. Centuries later, the room remains one of history's true enigmas. The clocks are still there, untouched, still locked at 3 minutes past midnight, the dust so thick you can trace a finger along the grain. The estate's owners, modern people with little patience for superstition, tried everything to make the clocks run. Modern clockmakers, with their tiny screwdrivers and digital tools, were humbled by the refusal of the old machines to yield. In the end, the room was resealed, a glass panel placed across the entry, so curious visitors can peer inside, but never step over the threshold. And yet, the effect of the room persists. Even today, the estate's guides warn guests not to linger in front of the clocks for too long. Some claim that the ticking resumes on certain nights, faint and muffled, but always ending abruptly at the same, impossible hour. Others say that anyone who watches the clocks at midnight will see the hands move, a fraction, a shudder, before freezing again, as if remembering something that time itself cannot forgive. What does it mean, really, to freeze time? In a world built on schedules and calendars, the idea is both seductive and terrifying. The chamber behind the wall is a message from the past, a testament to the human need to mark, to remember, and sometimes to try to forget. Maybe the clocks are a memorial to a moment no one wanted to relive. Or maybe they are a warning, left for us to puzzle over. A reminder that time, once broken, can never be wholly repaired. So, if you ever find yourself in an old house and you hear silence where there should be sound, remember the clocks. Remember the secret room, the hands that never moved, and the sense that some mysteries are meant to outlast their makers. In every ticking second, the past is just behind the wall, waiting, watching, and refusing sometimes to let the hour pass. Chapel walls hummed on the anniversary of an unsolved tragedy. In a remote corner of the ancient world, hidden behind high hedges and the winding paths of a weathered forest, there stood a chapel of modest stone and timber. It was a place woven through with centuries of faith and quiet sorrow, a sanctuary built not for grandeur, but for refuge, a humble haven where monks carried out their rituals in soft candlelight, tending to both prayer and memory. The walls themselves, thick and cool even in summer, seemed to hold the weight of unspoken stories. Yet, none of the tales whispered through its halls compared to the one tragedy that the brothers could never explain, nor truly forget: the mysterious death of a young scribe and the yearly hum that followed, echoing from the chapel's ancient stone. The story begins in a year lost to most records during the final days of a brutal winter. The monks, cloistered and isolated, kept to their routines, copying manuscripts, tending the gardens, and singing the daily offices with the same measured cadence. Among them was a young scribe, a newcomer whose skill with quill and ink was matched only by his curiosity. He worked late, far into the cold nights, transcribing ancient texts beneath the chapel's flickering lamps, alone but for the silent gaze of saints in stained glass. One evening, just after Vespers, the chapel was found unusually silent. The young scribe had not returned to his cell. When the monks searched, they discovered his body slumped over his desk, the unfinished page stained with ink and something darker. No wound, no sign of illness. His face, peaceful, betrayed nothing of fear or pain, just the stillness of a candle that has guttered out. The abbot, shaken, ordered prayers for his soul and a thorough investigation. But neither clergy nor apothecary could determine how or why he died. Some whispered of poison, others of a curse. Most said nothing at all. It might have ended as just another unspoken sorrow in the long, cold ledger of the monastery. But then the anniversary came, the same night, exactly 1 year later. As the monks gathered for evening prayers, a low, resonant hum began to vibrate through the chapel walls. It was not the wind, nor the shifting of old timbers, nor the deep drone of distant thunder. The sound was unmistakable, a low, sustained vibration, so deep it could be felt more than heard, reverberating through every stone. The brothers fell silent, faces pale in the candlelight, listening to the pulse that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the chapel. Some claimed the benches trembled beneath them. Others pressed their hands to the wall and felt a faint shiver, as if the stone itself was alive, remembering something it could not speak. The sound lasted only minutes, fading as mysteriously as it began. When it ended, the monks finished their prayers in hushed voices, casting uneasy glances at the walls around them. Each year, on the same night, the phenomenon returned, never earlier, never late. Always the same low hum, just after Vespers, just as the last slant of light faded from the stained glass. The monks came to call it the Night of Mourning, and a strange ritual grew around it. On that evening, no words were spoken outside of prayer. Candles were left burning at every window, and the brothers would sit together in silence, listening as if the dead scribe's spirit passed through the walls, seeking peace or perhaps answers. The monks kept records, hoping for a pattern, a shift in weather, a change in stone, any sign that might explain the mystery. But the records showed nothing. Clear skies or storms, heat or frost. The hum came all the same, unwavering. Outsiders were brought in. Architects, stonemasons, even alchemists, but no hidden chamber, no buried pipe, no natural cause could be found. The phenomenon defied reason, immune to investigation. Over generations, abbots came and went, each recording their own account of the event, each ending their entries with the same bewildered admission. The walls hummed. The source is not known. In time, stories grew around the chapel and its annual vigil. Some said the young scribe had been close to translating a text that should have remained secret, that his death was no accident but a silencing. Others whispered that the hum was not a haunting, but a warning, a pulse from beneath the ground, where old bones or older relics were buried, protesting their disturbance. A few monks, growing old in the shadow of the event, wondered if the walls themselves had learned to mourn, singing back to the world the grief no human voice dared speak aloud. Through it all, the mystery endured. Each generation of monks learned to live with the hum as both comfort and curse. Some came to believe it was a form of grace, a reminder that nothing, not even tragedy, is ever truly lost in the flow of time. Others, staring into the darkness as the sound faded, feared the opposite, that the past was alive and restless, and that the stones we build to keep out the world can never fully silence the memory of what has been done within them. Today the chapel still stands, weathered but unbowed, its walls bearing the subtle scars of centuries. The hum continues every year, drawing visitors and scholars who listen with recording devices and open notebooks, always hoping to catch what the monks have always known, that some mysteries are as deep as the stones themselves, and that the walls remember, long after the living have forgotten. So, if you find yourself one night within an old chapel, feeling the stones vibrate with a sound you cannot explain, remember the story of the scribe and the humming walls. Remember that even in silence, history finds a way to speak. And sometimes, it is the places built for prayer and peace that echo with the loudest, most enduring questions of all. The cornerstone of a prison was found to be a skull with inscriptions. Beneath the world's grandest cities and darkest corners, some stones remember what history wants to forget. Prisons. grim, echoing vaults where hope is exiled hold more secrets than any fortress or palace. Most are buried in silence, but sometimes the earth itself surrenders a truth too strange to dismiss. Imagine this. You are a worker, chisel in hand, called to demolish a wall that once held generations of condemned men. Your hammer falls, and what crumbles from the mortar is not just brick or clay, but something older, colder, a human skull, impossibly placed as the very cornerstone of the prison itself. The room falls silent. Work stops. In the dust, the skull stares back, jaw slightly open, as if forever caught between confession and warning. Yet, this isn't merely a relic. As you lift it into the light, the surface gleams with a latticework of carved inscriptions, delicate and precise, etched so finely you can barely see them without squinting. They wind over the crown and around the sockets, forming an endless spiral of Latin verses that no one can fully decipher. The overseer calls for the priest. The laborers cross themselves, whispering old prayers. Someone fetches the city magistrate. Word spreads through the alleys and taverns. There's been a discovery in the old prison, something that doesn't belong to any living man. Some say it is a saint's head, others that it is a murderer's last curse, sealed to keep the evil in. Some older masons shake their heads and mutter of ancient rituals, of the sacrifices made when buildings were raised, not just on earth and sweat, but on secrets the city would rather forget. No one remembers whose skull it was, or how it came to be the keystone of suffering. Records from the prison's earliest days, yellowed, damp, half-eaten by rats, speak only of delays, of unexplained accidents during construction, of blessings performed beneath the foundation at midnight. No names are listed, just a single chilling note. The foundation is set. The verses have been carved. Let none disturb. But now, centuries later, the cornerstone is broken. The skull is free. The Latin verses are passed from scholar to scholar, each hoping to crack the code. Some words are clear: death, judgment, eternity. But others slip and slide, fragmentary, as if the language itself is resisting translation. One passage circles the eye sockets: non vivi qui non confitetur. He does not live who does not confess. Another curls beneath the jaw, a prayer or perhaps a curse. Some say the words change under different light, that fresh scratches appear at dusk and vanish by dawn. No two readings are ever the same. Rumors spread that the prison's misfortunes all began with this secret. Guards spoke of sudden chills, of inmates waking with strange marks on their flesh, of dreams in which the walls whispered in Latin tongues no one alive could know. When the skull is removed, some expect the darkness to lift. Others fear a curse will finally be unleashed. But in truth, what lingers is uncertainty, a sense that every stone laid for punishment was bound, from the start, to a mystery deeper than law or justice. Did the builders believe the skull would trap evil inside, or keep the guilty from escaping? Was it meant as a warning, or as a plea for mercy from whatever powers ruled over stone and bone? Some point out that, for years after construction, the prison never lost a prisoner. No one escaped, and few survived their sentence. The very walls seemed to tighten with each confession, each cry in the night, each unclaimed soul. As demolition continues, workers handle the stones with new caution. Some refuse to touch them at all. A few slip away before nightfall, unwilling to linger in a place where the dead speak through mortar and dust. The skull is taken to a scholar's chamber, placed under glass, watched day and night. Visitors come, hoping to glimpse the writing, to solve the riddle. No one does. Latin scholars try, priests pray, historians argue. The verses resist every effort. Some words match old funerary rites, others echo lines from lost plays or prophecies. A few appear nowhere else in any record, as if they were invented for this skull, for this wall, for this secret alone. In the years that follow, stories bloom around the discovery. Some say that anyone who spends a night with the skull will dream of every soul who ever died within those walls. Faces flickering by, eyes wide with fear, mouths forming silent words no one dares repeat. Others claim that, since the cornerstone was lifted, the old prison ground grows colder each winter, grass refusing to grow, birds avoiding the place even in high summer. Yet, the true legacy of the skull isn't just in rumor or nightmare, but in the question it leaves behind. What are we willing to build our justice upon? Whose secrets must be buried so a city can sleep at night? Perhaps all prisons, all places of punishment and exile, are built on bones. If not in stone, then in memory, in conscience, in the hard truths that make us uneasy. The skull with its unreadable verses is a reminder that the past is never silent, and that beneath every wall we raise to keep danger out, there may be something waiting to be heard. So the next time you walk by an old prison, or a place where the stones feel heavier than they should, remember the skull in the cornerstone. Remember the verses no one can translate. And remember, some secrets once walled up never intend to be freed. A wall's shadow revealed shapes of people no longer alive. There are stories that linger long after the candles have burned low and the ink of the chronicles has faded. In the oldest quarter of a forgotten abbey, just as the sun sinks low behind twisted oaks and stone cloisters, a strange phenomenon begins. A mystery that turns stone into memory and shadow into ghost. Here, on a weathered wall, veined with cracks and lichens, the dying light conjures shapes no living eye should see. As each evening deepens, shadows fall across the abbey wall, and within their shifting outlines, the figures of those long dead appear. It is as if the very stones remember every soul who ever passed this way, refusing to release their memory to the dust. It began with whispers, monks speaking quietly in the refectory, servants exchanging wary glances as they swept the courtyard. At first, it was dismissed as a trick of the mind, the random play of sunset and shadow upon old stone, but the shapes that emerged were too precise, too haunting. Silhouettes of men and women in robes from generations past, the hunched posture of the abbot who died during a plague, the unmistakable tilt of a woman's veil, the sharp angle of a knight's wounded shoulder. Every detail seemed more than chance, more than the work of sun and cloud and ancient architecture. Those who saw the shadows could not look away. Some watched in silence, shivering as the wall came alive with motionless pageantry. Others wept quietly, recognizing the forms of those they had once loved or feared or lost. In the heart of the abbey, the wall's shadow became an unspoken obsession. People gathered at sunset, the courtyard filled with a hush that bordered on reverence, fear, and awe. No one dared to speak as the figures materialized, shifting, merging, dissolving with the fading light. Word of the phenomenon spread beyond the abbey walls. Pilgrims arrived, some hopeful, some desperate, all searching for a glimpse of the miraculous. Artists, painters and scribes alike, tried to capture what they saw, setting up their easels and inks before the ancient wall. But every attempt failed. The moment pen touched parchment or brush touched canvas, the magic vanished. The lines that seemed so clear in the dying sun became meaningless scribbles, the haunting presence evaporating into blankness. No memory, no talent, no prayer could trap the mystery on paper. The monks turned to prayer and inquiry, desperate to understand what haunted their home. Was it a miracle, a sign that the dead found peace in these hallowed halls? Or was it a warning, a restless stirring of souls denied justice or forgiveness? In a world where the boundary between the living and the dead was always thin, where every shadow could hide a message, the abbey was thrown into a turmoil of faith and doubt. Historians, centuries later, have searched for answers. Some suggest that subtle grooves in the wall, worn by generations of hands and weather, created a pattern that mimicked familiar shapes. Others point to the psychology of grief and suggestion, the way longing can transform randomness into remembrance. But the monks who lived it, who felt the temperature drop when the sun touched stone, who heard the stories grow with each season, were certain that something deeper was at work. For them, the wall's shadow was not just a curiosity, it was a living record. The abbey itself seemed to grieve, to yearn, to refuse the oblivion that time brings. The phenomenon persisted for years, sometimes fading, sometimes intensifying, always escaping the grasp of reason. When a beloved brother passed, his likeness would sometimes flicker in the growing dusk, a brief farewell from the stone itself. When a stranger died at the abbey's gate, some claimed his shadow joined the others, woven into the wall's nightly memory. And yet, for all its strangeness, the wall never inspired terror. Instead, there was a solemn comfort in its persistence, a reminder that the past does not simply vanish, that every life leaves a trace, if only in shadow and silence. In the hard years, when famine or plague took their toll, the sight of the shadows brought a kind of solace, proof that the abbey was not abandoned, that its story endured through generations, etched in the interplay of sun and stone. Attempts to study or exercise the wall changed nothing. The shapes ignored all prayers for release, all commands to depart. In time, the monks stopped trying to explain or control the phenomenon. They learned instead to honor it. At sunset, candles were lit along the courtyard, not to banish the darkness, but to welcome it. The wall became a place of pilgrimage, not only for those seeking miracles, but for anyone who understood the pain of remembering and the fear of being forgotten. So it remains, a fragment of a vanished world, a testament to the stubbornness of memory. In some seasons, visitors say the figures are so clear that they can count the folds in a robe, see the clasped hands of a lost lover, or recognize the stooped walk of a scribe who copied books by moonlight. In other years, the shadows blur, as if the past is retreating, waiting for the right watcher to call it forth again. Perhaps this is the true miracle, not that the wall holds the forms of the dead, but that the living still care enough to watch for them, night after night, year after year. For in the end, every wall is a canvas for our fears and hopes, our longing and regret. The Abbey's shadow reminds us that even as time erases names and faces, the light and darkness of our lives will always find a way to return, if only for a moment, at the edge of sunset. So if you ever find yourself in the ruins of an ancient abbey, pause as the sun slips below the horizon. Look closely at the old stones, at the shadows gathering in silent procession. Listen to the hush of history breathing through the evening air. You may see more than fading light. You may catch a glimpse of the past, alive and waiting in the ever-returning dance of shadow on stone. The wall that echoed one word, no matter what was spoken near it. In the chronicles of medieval Europe, where every stone seems to whisper secrets and every shadow hides a story, there exists a legend so eerie and so meticulously documented that it continues to defy logic centuries later. It is the story of the wall that would echo only one word, return, no matter what was spoken, sung, or screamed in its presence. And the more you learn about this anomaly, the harder it is to dismiss as mere superstition or trick of the wind. For in the heart of Castle Ironholt, where this phenomenon was witnessed, even the most hardened skeptics found themselves chilled by forces no science of their day could explain. Castle Ironholt stood on a crag above the river, its towers battered by centuries of storms, its courtyards haunted by the footprints of forgotten generations. The wall in question was not part of the grand keep or the ceremonial halls, but a narrow section bordering the old inner bailey, a strip of stone 30 feet long, 4 feet thick, and unremarkable in every way but one. According to the first written record, it was in the summer of 1427 that a group of squires, in the course of their evening drills, noticed something strange. Shouts and laughter would ring out as they trained in the fading daylight, but whenever they gathered by the southern wall, their voices came back to them in a way that defied sense. No matter what word was spoken, no matter the language, the age, or the tone, the echo would return as a single word, as clear and unmistakable as if a second voice were calling out from inside the stone itself. Return. If a squire shouted his own name, return. If the priest recited a prayer, return. If the sergeant barked orders, return. At first, it was dismissed as coincidence, a joke played by the older squires on the younger, or the product of a restless imagination brought on by too much mead and too little sleep. But as the days passed, the effect became impossible to ignore. The wall did not echo words, but only that one word, spoken in a voice that was always familiar, always just a little too close, as if a version of yourself, lost, forgotten, was pleading to be acknowledged. The phenomenon was reported up the chain of command until the castle's lord, a man renowned for his skepticism and sharp intellect, insisted on a demonstration. It was said that the lord stood before the wall at sunrise, reciting a list of numbers, names, and commands. Each time the echo was the same, return. Even when he whispered, even when he sang, even when he cursed at the stone, the answer was unchanging, return. The incident was carefully documented in the castle's chronicle, with notations from the steward, the chaplain, and even a passing merchant who was invited to test the wall for himself. All reported the same thing, a perfect, unmistakable echo, regardless of what was said. Word spread beyond the castle. The phenomenon drew the curious and the desperate, the scholarly and the superstitious. Priests brought holy water and relics. Alchemists scraped samples of mortar, and stone for analysis. Architects came with rulers and diagrams, convinced the answer lay in acoustics or some strange geometry. Every test failed. No hidden chamber was found, no hollow within the stone, no flaw in the wall's shape or construction. The echo persisted, mocking every attempt to explain it away. Some, seeking meaning in the mystery, whispered of old tragedies. Castle Ironholt had stood through wars, sieges, and betrayals. There were stories of lost soldiers who never returned, of a lord's daughter who vanished into the forest, of exiles who yearned to come home but perished in far-off lands. The word, return, seemed to speak not just from the stone, but from the weight of all that had been lost, all that had been left unfinished within those ancient walls. For the people who lived in the castle's shadow, the wall became a place of pilgrimage, mothers whose sons had gone to war, lovers separated by distance or death, travelers who feared they'd never see home again. All came to stand before the stone, to shout their grief and longing, only to hear that one word echo back, return. Some wept, some cursed, some laughed in fear, but none left unchanged. To many, it felt less like a curse and more like a reminder, the world itself pleading with them to reclaim what was lost, to right what had gone wrong. Over the years, attempts to break the wall's spell became desperate. Workers tried chiseling away the mortar, repairing and replastering the stone, but the echo always returned as soon as their backs were turned. Priests held midnight vigils, singing hymns and lighting candles, but the word never wavered. No matter the hour or the ritual, the answer was always the same. For generations, children dared each other to visit the wall at midnight, shouting nonsense and giggling until the echo sent them running. Soldiers stationed at Ironholt would carve their names into the stone nearby, believing that somehow, by inscribing themselves next to the wall, their memory would be anchored, and if they died far from home, their souls might one day return. The wall became woven into local superstition, into songs sung at winter feasts, into the fabric of the castle's very identity. Centuries later, when the castle had long since fallen into ruin, the story of the echoing wall remained. In the 19th century, a traveling antiquarian documented the tale, finding the section of the wall still standing, the surface worn smooth by weather and human hands. He stood alone and called out, more in jest than belief. And though the stones were silent, he claimed that, just for a moment, he felt the urge to go home, to return to something lost in his own memory. So what was the truth behind the wall's word? Was it a trick of acoustics? A fluke of medieval architecture that no modern mind has yet unraveled? Or was it a message, embedded by centuries of longing and regret, echoing from stone to heart and back again? A single word carrying the weight of all the things we wish could come home? Perhaps it is both. A puzzle and a plea, a fragment of history reminding us that some echoes never truly fade, some losses are never fully healed, and some places never stop calling to those who once belonged. In the end, the legend of the wall that only echoed return is less about the strangeness of stone, and more about the ache that lives within every one of us, the desire to return, to innocence, to love, to a time before everything changed. A longing so deep that even the walls themselves cannot help but speak it over and over through the centuries, until someone, someday, finally answers. Screams were heard from a sealed wall built by exiled craftsmen. In the heart of a forgotten medieval city, there stands a building so unassuming, so utterly ordinary to the modern eye, that few who pass by would ever guess its history. Yet the locals, even centuries later, still speak in hushed tones of what once happened there, for this was a structure that did not simply weather the ages, it haunted them. And at the heart of the legend is a single wall, a wall whose stones held secrets so heavy that every autumn they seemed to cry out in agony. The story begins not with a haunting, but with an act of vengeance. In the late 14th century, a guild of master masons, skilled artisans responsible for the city's greatest monuments, were accused of heresy and banished. Some say it was a plot by jealous rivals, others that the masons truly possessed forbidden knowledge. Whatever the truth, they vanished from public life, driven into the wilds beyond the city walls, their names struck from all official records. But the city could not do without their craft for long. When the time came to build a new administrative hall at the city's edge, the council was forced to employ these same exiled masons, secretly, and under the cover of darkness. It was a deal forged in shame, sealed by mutual contempt. The masons were paid well, but forbidden to sign their work or reveal their involvement, and so, night after night, these shunned craftsmen toiled in silence, laying stone atop stone, building not for pride, but for survival. What they built was solid, beautiful, and unlike anything seen before. The lines of the building were sharper, the stones set with uncanny precision, the structure oddly cold to the touch even in high summer. Yet, it was the rear wall, a long, unbroken sweep of ashlar masonry, that drew the most attention. There were whispers among the laborers of strange patterns carved on the innermost blocks, symbols quickly hidden as the courses rose. But none dared question the masons, whose eyes were always wary, always watching for betrayal. The building was completed, the masons paid and sent away once more. For a time, the hall stood silent, a new seat of civic power in a city eager to forget the darkness of its own compromises. But then autumn came, and with it, a sound that would never quite leave. At first it was faint, easily dismissed, a low moan, like wind caught between distant stones. But as the nights grew colder and the leaves fell, the noises became unmistakable, wailing, sobbing, even the sharp, panicked edge of screams. The sounds emanated from the rear wall, always in the hours just before dawn, and always in autumn. Residents who lived nearby spoke of children waking in terror, of horses bolting from their stalls, of a chill that crept into the bones. Some said the cries seemed almost human, but not quite, a sound from another world, or another time. City officials were quick to offer rational explanations. Settling stone, perhaps, or the wind funneled through some unseen crack. But even the bravest guards refused to patrol the building's rear, alone after dark. Word spread, and soon the hall was all but abandoned in the autumn months. Business conducted only by day, and always with a nervous glance toward that haunted wall. For decades, no one dared tamper with the building. But as the generations passed and memories faded, new owners grew bolder. The city's records show a flurry of complaints and petitions, demands for exorcisms, even appeals to distant bishops. Still, the wailing continued, unbroken and unexplained. It was not until the 17th century, nearly 300 years after the building's construction, that anyone dared dismantle the wall. A new magistrate, skeptical of all superstition, ordered the stones removed. What the workers found chilled even the most hardened among them. Inside the wall, embedded deep between the stones, were objects that had no place in any proper building. Rusted tools, splintered bits of bone, scraps of leather, and what appeared to be locks of human hair, braided and bound with wax. Most disturbing were the carved stones themselves. Each bore a unique sigil, a pattern that seemed to shimmer and twist in the torchlight. Some workers claimed they saw faces, frozen mid-scream, peering from the stone before being broken apart. No official explanation was ever given for these findings. The magistrate ordered the stones reset elsewhere, scattered throughout the city, and the site ritually cleansed. From that year forward, the wailing ceased. The hall remained, but the legend of the wall only deepened. Historians have debated the origins of the phenomenon for centuries. Some believe the wall was a deliberate act of vengeance, a curse set by the exiled masons upon those who had betrayed them. Medieval traditions are rich with tales of crying stones, objects believed to hold the pain or wrath of the builder, released only under certain conditions. Others argue that the objects within the wall were apotropaic, meant to protect or bind something inside, a restless spirit or a memory the city wished to keep hidden. But to those who lived through it, explanation was beside the point. What mattered was the effect. Families grew up telling their children to avoid the wall after dusk. Musicians and poets crafted ballads about the wailing hall, some painting the masons as tragic victims, others as dark magicians punished by fate. The wall became a place of pilgrimage for the desperate, who sometimes left offerings in the cracks in hopes of silencing their own grief. In the centuries since, the building has seen many uses: a courthouse, a warehouse, even a school. Each new generation swears the wailing is only legend, until the first cold night of autumn, when the wind seems to carry more than just leaves, and shadows lengthen against the ancient stones. Today, the building stands restored, its rear wall indistinguishable from any other. But if you visit on a quiet night, locals will still steer clear of that end of the alley. The superstitious leave sprigs of rosemary in the cracks, and children dare each other to run a hand along the stone. No screams have been heard for centuries, but the legend endures. It is as if the wall, though mute, still remembers. Perhaps, in the end, this is what history truly is. Not just the record of what happened, but the echo of what cannot be explained. A wall built by exiles, sealed by hands desperate for justice, mourned by the city that tried to forget them. Every stone a memory, every echo a warning. So, the next time you walk by an old wall and feel a sudden chill, or hear a sound you can't quite name, remember the Wailing Hall. Some secrets are not buried in the earth, but sealed upright, screaming in the very walls around us. A bridge wall grew warm during trials and cold during pardons. There are places in the world where stones seem to remember, where the boundaries between judgment and fate, between life and death, are woven not only into the laws of men, but into the very walls themselves. Along the edge of a long-forgotten river, under the shadow of a weather-beaten city, once stood a stone bridge known less for its passage than for the secret held within its masonry. This was the Judgment Bridge, a crossing with a reputation so uncanny that even centuries after its collapse, local stories shudder with its memory. Here, beneath the echo of footsteps and the roar of floodwaters, a strange ritual played out for generations. The touch of a judge's hand to the bridge wall, the sudden sensation of warmth or cold, and the fate of the accused decided in a moment of impossible certainty. The records are astonishingly clear for an era that so often blurred fact and myth. Court clerks, scribes, and even foreign travelers wrote of this bridge as if it were both a place and a living witness. It was not the size of the bridge that set it apart, nor its design, which was practical and sturdy. A broad stone arch, thick walls lined with moss, parapets battered by wind and rain. No, it was the ritual. Before verdicts were pronounced in the trials held at its midpoint, the presiding judge would place a bare hand on a certain stone set into the wall, always the same, a slab worn smooth and faintly luminous in the sun. Witnesses described the moment with a hush. If the judge felt the stone grow warm beneath his palm, the sentence would be death, and the condemned would be led away to execution. If the stone turned icy, the accused would receive mercy, a pardon, release, sometimes a lesser punishment. It was said to never fail. Not once in all the years of recorded trials did the stone give a false sign, and judges, even those most skeptical of superstition, learned quickly not to ignore the message the bridge offered. Some questioned it quietly, testing the stone before and after, trying to trick it. None could explain the phenomenon. The verdicts followed the sign. The stone's judgment became the city's. It began, so the archives suggest, as a mere curiosity, a cold patch in the wall noticed by chance, or a warm breath felt through the stone during an early spring trial. But word spread quickly among the magistrates. At first, it was whispered in private, a tool for the uncertain, a secret solace for those burdened by the power to end or spare a life. Over decades, the ritual became law. No judgment was complete until the bridge wall was consulted. Some say the accused themselves would watch the judge's hand with desperate hope or terror, knowing that this was the true moment when their fate was sealed. Why this bridge? Why that stone? Theories multiplied across the centuries. Some believed the bridge had been built atop an ancient site of sacrifice, a crossroads where untold blood had been spilled, giving the stones a taste for justice or vengeance, or perhaps only the echo of human fear. Others wondered if minerals or underground springs beneath the bridge played tricks on the senses. A few alchemists, brought in to test the wall in the 15th century, could find nothing unusual. No magnetic field, no hidden pipe, no natural explanation. The stones were stones, and yet, when judgment was at hand, they came alive. Over the years, stories attached themselves to the ritual. It was said that a particularly cruel judge, infamous for his harshness, felt nothing when he placed his palm on the stone. No heat, no cold, just emptiness. He tried again and again, in front of an anxious crowd, and each time the bridge refused to answer. That very night, the judge died in his sleep. Another tale tells of a mother, condemned for theft, whose child clung to the judge's robes as the verdict was about to be pronounced. The judge hesitated, hand trembling, but the stone chilled so suddenly he cried out, and the woman was pardoned on the spot. In both legend and record, the bridge's verdict became more than tradition. It became law, unquestioned, even when it went against all evidence or popular opinion. It is easy to imagine the tension that must have filled the air on those days. The city gathered, crowding the bridge and its banks, the river churning below, the accused standing in chains, the magistrates solemn, the priests murmuring prayers, all waiting for the moment of contact. The judge, face pale, would press his palm to the wall, and in that silent second, centuries of custom, fear, and hope would swirl together. Warmth, execution, cold, mercy. No one dared argue with the stone. As time passed and empires changed, the ritual endured. Even skeptical rulers, obsessed with order and rational law, could not quite bring themselves to abolish it. Some say this was because of the bridge's unblemished record. Never did the stone lead to a scandal, a riot, a wrongful death exposed. Others claim it was fear, pure and simple, the fear that to break the ritual would be to invite chaos or disaster, as if the bridge itself would take revenge. In the end, the bridge was lost, washed away in a violent flood that swept through the city one spring, carrying whole streets and lives with it. When the waters receded, nothing remained but scattered stones and the memory of the old law. The city built a new crossing further downstream, this time of wood and iron, practical and forgettable. The ritual faded, then vanished, living on only in yellowed court records and trembling stories told to children on stormy nights. Yet, even now, there are those who claim to have seen the remains of the bridge on the riverbed when the water runs low. Great slabs of stone, cool to the touch even in midsummer, or strangely warm under the hand of those who dare to test them. No one knows for certain what force, if any, once governed the bridge's verdicts. Was it conscience made tangible? The collective hopes and fears of a city condensed into stone? Or simply a quirk of memory? A legend grown too powerful to question. But if you ever stand on a bridge, hand pressed to the old stones, feeling a sudden warmth or chill that seems to answer a question you have not dared to ask, remember the Judgment Bridge. Remember the lives balanced on a single touch, the fates written not by words, but by the inexplicable verdict of stone. In the end, perhaps justice is not always blind. Perhaps, in some places it is waiting, silent and watchful, in the walls beneath our feet, and sometimes it answers. It